Welcome to the MCU, by the way. You're joining at a bit of a low point.
You're here for Deadpool and Wolverine. I know, but first, some context. So I recently made a video on this channel about Spider-Man No Way Home, talking about what still holds up from the movie, but also some of the things that don't. And while people had a lot of different things to say, there was one comment in particular that came up again and again and again. Deadpool and Wolverine is the same. Essentially, people that believe No Way Home has aged like milk think that this movie will be in the same boat. And on paper, that should be true. They're both films overflowing with cameos and nostalgia that were sold on the excitement of bringing back some fan favorite actors.
Hey, Hugh, you want to play Wolverine one more time?
Yeah, sure, Ryan.
By all means, Deadpool and Wolverine really should get worse every time you watch it. So then why, when revisiting the film, did it actually get better?
That's a question. That's a question.
To answer this question, there's two things we have to understand. First, what even is this movie? Now, some of you might say,
it's not cinema, it's something else.
But the answer I was looking for is this. Yes, for those that don't know, Deadpool and Wolverine is a comedy. Its primary objective is to make you laugh, and if it does that, it has succeeded. But what does that have to do with how the film ages? Well, in most of these superhero multiverse movies, the parts of the film that have the biggest drop in terms of how the audience felt the first time compared to how they feel on rewatch are the cameo scenes. Because these scenes often don't have anything to offer beyond the novelty of seeing a familiar face, they can end up feeling very empty once that novelty is gone. This is something that I criticized about No Way Home, where I felt that several sequences, specifically in the first half of the movie, felt pretty lacking on rewatch, because the scenes themselves were almost entirely built on the novelty of some returning villain. But this is where I feel Deadpool and Wolverine being a comedy actually benefits the film. Because remember what I said about Deadpool and Wolverine's primary objective being to make you laugh? Well, just take a look at how the film plays its cameo scenes.
We don't know that guy.
You see, the cameos here never get in the way of the movie fulfilling its primary objective, being funny.
I ain't know my daddy, but I'm sure I shot out of his dick ready. Yeah, he was laying them buttery nuts all up in my mama, and I shot out there and I said, "What's up, Doc?"
We never have to pause the comedy in order to do cameos. And this is important because what it means is, even once you strip away all the initial surprises and thrills, you're still left with some great comedy, which is ultimately what we go to Deadpool movies for in the first place.
How long does it take for you to regenerate?
Regenerate?
Okay, so that explains one of the areas in which I think the movie still holds up and has something to offer even once the initial novelty is gone. But it doesn't explain why I said the film actually got better. For that, we move on to the second thing that you have to understand. My initial experience with the film. Going into Deadpool and Wolverine, I was admittedly a little bit cynical. There was a couple things in the lead up to this film that I just really didn't like. For one, this movie was bringing back Hugh Jackman as Wolverine after they already gave him a perfect and definitive ending in Logan. Something that, to be honest, I'm actually still not happy about because I like my dead characters to, stay dead. And on top of that, the movie was also, once again, going down the whole multiverse cameo route.
Gratuitous cameos? Indiscriminate use of variants? The whole package?
When Spider-Man No Way Home came out, this idea of bringing back fan-favorite characters through the multiverse and having them in these epic crossovers was so fresh and exciting, and I, just like everyone else, was totally on board with it. But by the time we got to Deadpool and Wolverine, that whole gimmick had been played out several times, and I just wasn't really looking forward to it. It's not that cameos are inherently bad. I mean, a quick, well-placed cameo can be a fun cherry on top for fans. But I think by the time this movie came out, me and a lot of other people realized that cameos are also not inherently good or beneficial. At the end of the day, Cameos aren't going to determine the quality of a film. That comes down to the writing, directing, acting, and in the case of Deadpool and Wolverine specifically, the comedy. So going in, I just felt like this movie wasn't going to have anything to offer beyond cameos and nostalgia bait. And I think this bit of closed-mindedness is why initially I didn't really like the movie, but upon rewatch, I've definitely changed my mind about some things. First of all, the cameos are a much smaller part of this film than I initially thought they were. And this is interesting, because one of the main criticisms of this movie is that it's all just a bunch of cameos. But having just rewatched the film, I gotta say, that just isn't really true. In fact, there's only 2 major cameo sequences throughout this entire film. There's the Chris Evans one, where he shows up as Johnny Storm, and we also get to see Sabretooth, Pyro, and some others. And then there's the sequence later in the film with Elektra, Blade, X-23, and some dude who's about to make a name for himself. Other than those 2 sequences, everything else in this film is simply what was promised in the title: Deadpool and Wolverine playing with each other. Pause. So this is where I think how the movie holds up for you is really going to come down to what you liked about it in the first place. If your biggest reason for liking this film was all of the cameos, then yes, maybe this film really will get worse for you every time you watch it. But if your main enjoyment simply came from seeing these 2 guys on screen together, then you'll probably have a lot of fun going back to it. Now, the cameos weren't the only thing that I viewed differently the second time around. On rewatch, I also realized this movie is a lot funnier than I gave it credit for. Look, I was never really the biggest fan of the first 2 Deadpool movies, and given my skepticism heading into this one, I guess I didn't end up enjoying the movie as much as I probably should have. Because if you are a Marvel fan, which I am, it's actually kind of hard not to get at least a little bit of enjoyment out of this movie. I mean, it is filled with inside jokes that only people who've kept up with all of these different movies will understand. And even some deep cuts, and I mean deep cuts, you won't get unless you keep up with the behind the scenes of these movies.
There's only been one Blade. There's only ever gonna be one Blade.
The personal lives of these actors.
This is Logan. He's usually shirtless, but he's let himself go since the divorce.
And just the general movie pop culture.
Behold the head of your precious queen, Furiosa!
But even beyond the inside jokes and references, I think the general comedic dynamic between Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman works pretty well here. Like, Deadpool, at least for me personally, can sometimes become a little bit exhausting given his style of humor, something that probably contributes to why I never loved the first 2 films. But by having Hugh Jackman's Wolverine here as basically a polar opposite, it helps to really balance out the movie. You know, I never would have thought it, but Deadpool and Wolverine has surprisingly gone from a movie I really didn't like to now one of my top 3 favorite Marvel films.
You serious?
No, I'm just kidding. Although this video has been mainly positive, I don't want to make it sound like I think this is the new Winter Soldier. It definitely has its flaws, and the story here is honestly pretty thin. Like, there's just enough of a narrative here to get us from sequence to sequence, and if this wasn't a comedy film primarily focused on just making us laugh, that might be a bigger issue. I also, if given the choice, would still choose for Logan to be Hugh Jackman's last outing as Wolverine, as it really was the perfect ending. But I guess no endings are safe nowadays. So does Deadpool and Wolverine get worse every time you watch it? You let me know down in the comments, click somewhere on the screen to watch another video, and go subscribe to the channel, but only if you want to.